Hello. Can everybody shift across in their rows so there's space for latecomers to get in? Always happens. Thank you. Okay. Now the next talk will be Arjen with the State of the Union.
Yes. Hello, my name is Arjen Hiemstra. I have been a KDE contributor for a while now, and have been working on a project called Union for also a while now. And I will be giving an update on how that's going. So, to start off with, let's talk about what is this union thing again, because I'm sure most of you here know it's not like the workers' union thing, it's a programming thing. Several years back, I, along with several other people, concluded that we have a pretty nasty problem within KDE when it comes to our styling, which is that we right now have 4 different implementations of what we call Breeze. We have the widgets implementation, we have a version implemented for Plasma, we have a Qt Quick implementation, and we have a different Qt Quick implementation, because of course, why not? This is mostly a problem because, yeah, oh, wow, okay, that was, that was the wrong button, apparently. What kind of language is this keyboard? Yeah, I mean, I guess we're just skipping to the beginning. Spoilers, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're at the beginning and again, so I can take it back here. So, as I was saying, the problems with this being, if you want to change anything right now with regards to Breeze, you are stuck doing 4 different kinds of implementations for that change. And I'm pretty sure everyone here will agree that, you know, doing the same change 4 times feels like a lot of unnecessary work. The other problem is some of these implementations require a lot of developer knowledge, especially the Qt widgets one. It is painful, even for me, to make changes there, because it's not just that it's Qt widgets code. I don't like writing Qt widgets code, I will admit. But it's also that it's very specific type of Qt widgets code that really requires you to know how the class called QStyle works. So yeah, it's painful, and if you have a designer coming in with, hey, I have this amazing idea, they quickly get turned off because us as developers say, yeah, it's cool, but sorry, this requires 4 implementations, and we need someone who knows how this QStyle thing works for that. So a lot of this gets bogged down in technical details. And one of the other bits about this is, so we have one of our styles using Qt widgets for rendering Qt Quick stuff. And that's not ideal from the Qt Quick perspective because it doesn't actually make use of a lot of the features that Qt Quick has for its scene graph, which is actually how the other Qt Quick implementation came about, but that's a different story. All right, so this was identified like 5 years ago already, but it's a very hard problem to solve. I mean, we got into this state for a reason. Getting out of that state is a lot of work as well. So at some point I did some thinking and came up with this idea about, hey, how about we define, or we pull back a little, and rather than having either a Qt Quick style that makes use of Qt widgets or a Qt widget style that makes use of Qt Quick, which was suggested at some point, how about, rather than that, try to define a core data structure that both implementations can use. So that's how I came up with this idea of having 3 layers: an input layer that generates a data structure, and then a data structure that can then be used by output layers to style things based on whatever that specific part of the platform uses. I did some proof of concepts for that. It seemed to be working. It felt like a right idea, so last year somewhere we started doing a more production-ready implementation for this. But that did mean we needed a plan, because trying to build this entire thing where we go, yeah, we have 4 implementations, and we throw all of that out, and we have this new thing here, which will be amazing immediately, yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. So let's see if we can come up with some smaller steps that we can take so that we slowly can go into this state where, yeah, we have this implementation that's now become obsolete. Oh, and then we have that implementation that's become obsolete, etc. So my main focus has been on Qt Quick as output, building a Qt Quick style for, again, I much prefer writing Qt Quick code over Qt widgets, so it's partly personal preference. It's also, I feel, a bit easier to some extent, and we have a bunch of implementations on the Qt Quick side that we can make obsolete if this works out. And one of the things I decided initially was to use Plasma's SVG theming as an input format. Because this was something that we already have and something that we know how it needs to look. So it meant that we simply needed to consume that and send it through this intermediate layer and then create a Qt Quick thing that outputs that. Both of those sides being known, so it meant that we could focus on that data layer. Yeah, so focus on the data layer, focus on that intermediate layer, and later on worry about, hey, is this actually the right choice of input or output? So that gets us to a year later, about a year. I don't recall the precise date of Akademy last year, but a year later, where are we now? Well, I'll start with some images. This is Discover. This is Discover running with Union. And I think most of you will look at this and think, that just looks the same. Which is the intention, don't worry, because this is also Discover. And I know this looks horrible, but this was a testing style I did to make sure, to give me myself an idea of how much control do I actually have over Discover from the style at this point. So for those of you familiar with Breeze and everything, this is not just a color scheme. Because there's some details here that are different, like a lot of things are missing rounded corners. Cards have a very different styling, both without and with hover and everything like that. So basically, this screenshot is proof of I have control over how Discover looks from the style. And also, I will note, I did not touch a single line of Discover to make these changes. So, current state, Qt Quick controls. We're working on building that style out. There's a bunch of stuff that's already working, like most of the basic controls that you would use in an application. There's some bits and pieces where we still have work to do, most notably table controls, and there's some calendar-related stuff that was added in Qt 6 that still needs styling. Funnily enough, as far as I know, none of our other Qt Quick implementations have styling for those calendar controls yet. So if we can get that into Union, Union will actually be the first to provide a Breeze style for those things. An important thing to note here, Kirigami. We have I wrote the usual Kirigami integration points for it, but also I created a bunch of things. So the custom controls from Kirigami are actually under control of Union, which is something that if you've ever seen a Kirigami application running on a different platform with a different Qt Quick style, you'll notice that the cards, for example, will usually still look like Breeze. That's one of the specific things I wanted to fix with Union, to make sure that the style controls the entire application. Kirigami is, there are still some issues with some of the controls. I'm basically doing something with Kirigami that was designed but was never fully tested. So there's a bunch of controls that we run into where the template basically doesn't do enough, and the actual control does a whole lot of stuff, which means that if you're then re-implementing that control, you also need to do all of that. It's fine, it will be fixed eventually, hopefully. Some notes on the Qt Quick side, Qt Quick API details. I've included a snippet here of what one of our style implementations looks like. On the Qt Quick side, most of this is controlled through attached properties. There is an implementation of a custom renderer for rectangles because there's a bunch of features that I needed there. I'll talk a bit more about why that is later. And I implemented a custom layouting thing so that the style is actually in control of how certain sub-elements are placed. This was to deal with spin boxes, for example. Spin boxes on different platforms and with different styles will have different positions of where the up and down or plus or minus buttons are placed. And I really wanted to be able to give that decision to the style. That's all working now. And as I was saying, we have an initial implementation using Plasma SVG. That required a lot of extra information because Plasma SVG turns out that SVGs only only contain graphical data and not really information on, hey, this element should be used for this border and this element should be used there. So we had a whole bunch of extra stuff around this to basically encode what in the current implementation of Plasma theming, the Qt Quick Code encodes, it worked, or it works. It's not ideal. So somewhere at the start of this year, I made a decision that this Plasma input format was not gonna be future-proof. I would not be comfortable releasing a version of Union using Plasma HVG as input because it would not be future-proof. It would basically be saying, yeah, here's this cool new thing, but you can't do anything with it because, yeah, you can't do anything with the input layer. So instead, I've went and spent a bunch of time on something that I've originally already wanted with this, which is to use CSS. And why CSS? Well, I had some requirements for the input layer. Very specifically, one of the explicit requirements here is that there is no logic in the input layer. Having logic there would make the data flow extremely complex and would make it very hard to cache anything from that input layer. So basically, at the design phase, I went, okay, no logic in the input layer. Also, I want something that is easy to change for non-developers. So it basically should be a text file that you can edit to get different results. And it needs to be something that is extensible because, as already mentioned, like Kirigami controls, I need to be able to style those. Eventually, Plasma has a whole bunch of different things. We probably want to use this at some point for Plasma, so those need to be able to be supported, etc. So, who here has never seen any CSS? Yeah, so CSS is a very well-known language. It's very actively developed, a bit too actively sometimes. But it's also designed in such a way that it abstracts, it's an abstract description of a style, because that's how HTML uses it. That's all nice and such, but there's also some other sides to this. Because of how it's used, a lot of CSS is geared towards web usage. And more importantly, that also means that most of the implementations of CSS are tied to web browsers and web engines. With a few exceptions, if you look around, like for C++, CSS parser libraries, you'll get a few hits. Most of those are hits of libraries that are no longer maintained and implement some version of CSS2. Whereas right now, I think we're at CSS 4-ish already. So this is a problem, and this is why I chose to initially work with Plasma SVG rather than going for CSS immediately. Well, luckily, there is one project that kind of stands out from the rest, which is called Servo. Servo is a Rust-based web engine created by Mozilla to, I think, originally to replace Firefox's rendering engine. That never happened, but still, the project is there. And one of the advantages of Servo is that it's actually designed in a fairly modular way. Most importantly, for our case, there is one Rust crate, which is called CSS Parser, which ostensibly implements a CSS parser using Rust. or that's at least what the name suggests. It's part of Servo. It's used by Servo to for their CSS parsing. It does support a whole lot of modern CSS. But it's actually, turns out that it's quite a low-level library. And it's a parser, yes, but it's a parser that basically gets you a bunch of function calls where you go, okay, yeah, now you need to do something with this data. Which, I guess it works fine if you're Servo, but if you want something where you're like, okay, I need to get some sort of abstract description out of this CSS file that I can then transform into something that my style can use, it's not that great. There's also a bunch of CSS, modern CSS features that it just goes, yeah, you have to implement this yourself. Luckily, there are some bits and pieces, extra crates that that help. Most importantly, there is a selector parser library or crate that's also done by Servo, which takes care of the entire parsing of selectors. That saves a lot of headache, but there's other bits where I basically ended up writing still sort of my own parser, simply because that's what the crate didn't implement that. So there's also the other side of this. It's great. It's this thing is available, but it's Rust. And Union is basically a set of plugins for Qt code, which it kind of requires it to be C++. Luckily, there is some stuff that helps. Specifically, there's the CXX crate, which in this case I decided to, okay, let's create my own library using CXX with a very thin layer for a very thin CSS or C++ API so that I can use Rust for most of the actual CSS parsing tasks and just kind of output this abstract description of what the CSS file produces. So that's what I eventually called, by the very creative name, CXX Rust CSS parser. It's a library that basically allows you to take a CSS file, have the Rust code take care of the parsing, and then get an abstract representation of the contents of that CSS file out of it, so that you can then do stuff with that. Like, build a styling engine. So, great, we have that thing, we have CSS. How do we make use of CSS for styling our applications? Basically, how do I transform a bunch of things like this kind of gobbledygook? How do I transform that into something that the application can do stuff with? So one very important concept in CSS is selectors. Selectors basically say, hey, this is a query to your application. If something matches this, you do something with that element. Me personally, I knew because I kind of was hoping for using CSS for Union anyway. I kind of stole this idea from CSS in Union because it's a concept that's just very well applicable to what Union is trying to do. So Union has the exact same concept, which meant that, doing this from CSS, that's easy to map. So as an example, again, here's a bit of Union's Qt Quick API. It basically says, hey, if you're a button, then I declare that this is a button and some states, and then there's some of the possible CSS selectors that allow you to target this specific element. Either very generically, like, hey, every button needs this styling, or specifically the pressed state of a primary button needs this styling. So the other thing is properties. Properties tell your application, Union, what to do with an element. How does it change when this rule applies, when the selector applies? This is where things get a bit hairy with regards to web. Web CSS has a whole bunch of properties, and a whole bunch of those properties are not applicable to Union or to an application in general, because they say things about how certain layout stuff happens, or things about overflows and such that just really don't map nicely. And this is actually the reason why I wanted a more of a low-level CSS parsing library for doing this, because I wanted to be able to, from Union, say, these are the kind of properties that we support. Because, again, some of them just don't make sense. So we still need to know what those properties are. And luckily, modern CSS, I think it's very modern, I don't even know if it's official standard yet, does have a syntax for declaring properties. And I realized that I could just use this same syntax to declare all the properties that Union would need. It would mean that you need to load first one CSS file that just defines these are all the properties that we need, and then with that it can then parse all the rest. And that turned out to actually work really well. I think that works a lot more, it's a lot more flexible than having to worry about designing an API to define properties in the parser before loading a CSS file. So the other bits is important in CSS is functions. This is one of the areas where the CSS parser crate really, it kind of disappointed me. Basically, all of the function stuff in modern CSS, if you use that crate, you need to re-implement it manually. Even vars, which are basic, more of a parser thing than really a function call, even those you need to re-implement. And that was a lot of work. So that is a lot of work, which means that there's a lot of stuff that in CSS functions that has not yet been implemented. It does give us some flexibility because other stuff, like having a simple linear interpolation function, was something that we could add. So, in conclusion, I switched to CSS for input for Union. I am, despite the issues with the crate, I am very much, I think it's a good choice. It's a choice that long-term will benefit us. It means that we have a language to work with where we can say, hey, we have this thing. If you want to build a new style, here's the documentation on CSS. Go wild. See what works, see what doesn't. It will there will be changes, but it will not be a dead end. So, with that, what's next? Well, obviously, this needs to go to users or at the very least, developers, people who like testing this thing. So we need to make a first release. I had hoped to be able to do this in conjunction with Plasma 6.5. Unfortunately, that's not going to be feasible because there's too much that still needs to be implemented. Hopefully, we can do a release somewhere between 6.5 and 6.6. We'll see. It will contain a CSS version of Breeze, which means we'll now have our 5th implementation of Breeze. Hooray! The thing is, one of the things I hope is that this implementation can actually start replacing the Qt Quick to Breeze style already, because it should do mostly the same as that style, except with a different backend, and in a way that is hopefully more scalable towards the future. So the other things are, I don't think many of you were not at Andy's talk earlier about Plasma Next, but Andy's been working on this project for a while now, and he really wants to build a new application style using the design system they're developing. And it's kind of stuck on Union getting to a state where they can start developing, this can be start developing with, because otherwise they would also need to do 4 implementations of that style, and finding some developers for all that, it's a nightmare. So hopefully we can start building on this soon. It will probably require extra development in Union because there's several features that I know aren't yet fully supported, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so there's stuff that I have not yet implemented for the CSS part there. Those will eventually need to be supported for it to be fully, to work like a lot of people would expect from CSS. And especially more fanciful, advanced styles will require features like gradients or textures. And one very important thing that is not yet implemented is animations, which is its own kind of worms. And then there's other output formats, most prominently Qt widgets. There is a merge request from Joshua Goins, who started a very initial implementation of a Qt widget style, which means, so I know it works, but that still requires a lot of work. And there are potential other targets within KDE. We have decorations that are right now hard-coded, or do their own painting and everything. Stuff like that might also be a good target to eventually unionize. And now we do get at the question slide in the right order. So, any questions?
Questions? Come first. No. You, yes.
So, thanks for a good presentation, Arjen. I didn't watch your presentation last year, but I had an understanding that Union was also a plugin-based architecture where you could choose different styling languages such as YAML, CSS, and other, and then the designer could basically choose which one to use. Is that something that's still relevant, or did you move away from that? Thanks.
So yes, at its core, it's still a plugin-based architecture. The input formats are plugins. right now, while the plasma SVG input is still there, it's not very well maintained because I've been making a lot of changes in favor of the CSS stuff, which means that the plasma SVG has kind of bit rotten. I've been trying to decide whether I want to revive that or, get rid of it. Nate actually made a decent argument that eventually we may want to at least be able to support a bunch of plasma styles so that we can port plasma without needing to get rid of all the 900 something themes that are there. But that's. Yeah, so in that case, we would at least have two different input formats, one CSS-based, one plasma SVG-based.
I'm being...
Perhaps I'm overthinking this, but have you made any performance considerations in terms of resource use, for example, when all of the style engines now include a CSS parser?
Yes, I've actually done a bunch of performance work recently. Interesting side note on the CSS parsing thing. Because the input layer is basically immutable, we can parse the entire CSS file, get that result, and then just discard the entire CSS parser again. So that bit, eventually my goal there is to actually be able to cache that so that you basically don't even need to run the CSS parser for application startup. But that's a long-term goal. So it's not. Oh, you mean the desktop style? Yeah, so the desktop style does basically it creates a Q style and then uses that Q style with QPainter to render to an off-screen texture and then render that off-screen texture as a Qt object again. That's one of the things that I mentioned earlier where that implementation of the Qt style is not making good use of what Qt offers. Yes, that specific case, or for that case, I hope that Union will be better.
Okay.
So this is less of a question, more like a wish list, but I really hope somebody makes the Fluffy Bunnies theme with this. I really want to see that. That's all. Thanks.
Anybody else? More questions? I can get you from... It's fine, I can reach you.
You mentioned something about rectangles because some API is missing, especially for the cute folks in the room. Maybe you can drop some wishes for them.
Yeah, so I said I was going to mention that later. I forgot. So basically, if you have CSS, for a CSS background, you need variable border width, you need variable border colors, you need variable corner radius. There's a whole bunch of features that are implied by what CSS offers there. So far, I have a custom renderer using a shader that basically supports a whole bunch of that. Not yet variable border colors, but I have an idea how I can do that. So that's a feature that will be supported at some point. Also things like gradients and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of features there from CSS that you need for because you want to be able to offer to designers that, hey, if you want a button with weird different borders and colors and glowy things and everything, yeah, that should be possible eventually.
Thanks. Do you think that a kind of Q CSS parser written in C++, of course, would be interesting or beneficial in long term, in future?
Maybe I am not the one that's going to maintain it because I already have this thing to take care of. It's the thing is with CSS, it's one of those web standards that just keeps evolving. I think it's better to have it in a central, like shared repository of some kind. Maybe eventually we will replace the current implementation. We'll see how that goes.
Awesome. One more very quickly from online.
Yeah. So the question is, to what extent of theming will be allowed in Union on a scale of color schemes changes to the widget style changes?
So in that regard, I showed two pictures of Discover. One with Bree style, one using a completely different style. I can maybe very quickly go back. Yeah, so this is the extent that it already allows now. So there's different border sizes, different border styles, different fonts, different colors. It's a lot more extensive than just color schemes. Eventually, I hope that the entire look of the application will be under control of Union.
Okay, we've run out of time, unfortunately. So if anyone has more questions for Arjen, come find him afterwards.